Welcome to Attic Raiders Retro Reviews, where today I'm going to be showing you how to make a chemical tank in miniature out of junk for your wargaming table, whether that's for Warhammer 40K, Stargrave or any other game. These are really good for providing cover for your miniatures when you're playing and can be used in almost any setting. So let's get started and take a look at how I went about making this. To begin with, I'm going to use one of these long, thin 25cl cocktail cans, and I've already taken the ring pull off of this. I'm going to put that onto some thick cardboard and draw around the end of it to get a circle to cover up that opening. That circle will of course be too big to fit inside the lip of the can, so I'm just sketching in a slightly smaller diameter circle in order to be able to fit it. That then just needs cut out with a pair of sharp scissors and you'll be able to test fit it into the end of the tin. Once you're happy with the size of that circle, we're then going to use a hobby knife and scratch up the surface of the tin here. This will leave lots of little grooves that will mean that the glue will adhere to the metal better. And I'm just going to use a little bit of super glue all over and then stick that cardboard circle right in place. And once that's dry, I'm just going to do exactly the same thing with the other end of the tin. Now we want to start adding some detail, and nothing says sci-fi industrial like rivets. So I've just got some plastic half pearls here from my local craft store, and I'm gluing them on with super glue, just gently maneuvering them into place with the end of a mechanical pencil. Once they're all glued on evenly round the circumference of the circle, I'm going to add some hatch detail, and again I'm just using super glue for this, and I've cut this hatch out of the same cardboard, layering it up and adding on some more slightly smaller pearl rivets. Of course, a hatch is useless without some kind of a handle in order to open it, so I've just taken a paper clip and I'm bending it into shape here and then using some metal cutters to get it to the size that I want. Of course, with this shape I could have just used a staple instead of bending and cutting, but it wouldn't be as thick and sturdy. I'm then going to hold it in place and mark out where those ends actually contact the surface so that I can then use a pin drill and drill out those holes. By pushing the handle into pre-drilled holes and gluing it instead of just gluing it directly to the surface, we're going to get a much stronger bond, and it's much more unlikely to break or fall off. Now we don't want these chemical tanks to roll about on our battlefield, so we're going to have some kind of cradle for it. And for this I'm using a toothbrush package holder from a supermarket. Now I don't think you can actually get these outside of Europe, but here in the UK they come in all shapes and sizes and will normally be thrown out after use, so you can get them completely free if you ask nicely. For this particular build, I'm using a Colgate Twister 2-pack holder, which seems to be the only model that actually comes in this exact size. Now this kind of plastic doesn't really like glue or paint, so before doing anything to it, we're going to have to prep it a little bit. And that just involves taking some high grit sandpaper and running it across all of the flat surfaces just to rough them up a bit so that they will accept paint a lot better. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing to the surface of my cocktail can. Now as far as painting goes, I'm not actually using a primer for this, and I'm not spray painting it, which would of course be much quicker. But I find with this particular plastic item, it's got a lot of deep grooves, and it makes spray painting it really difficult and getting the paint into all of those crevices. So I'm using an old brush instead and painting my dark iron from Tamiya directly on, and I can press that into the grooves and make sure that I've got really good coverage. This stuff also has a metallic coat to it, so it dries nice and hard and it won't flake or chip off of that sanded plastic. Now I want this whole thing to look really rusty, so I'm using a reddish brown acrylic and stippling it on with a sponge quite liberally over every surface. And when that's dry, I'm using the same sponge to stipple on a more orangey brown colour over the top of that. And when that's dry, I'm going to use a gunmetal colour, in this case Lead Belcher from Citadel, and I'm going to dry brush that over every surface to give it back a bit more of a metallic look. And as you can see here, once you've gone through those steps over absolutely everything, then you get this really, really nice effect, and it looks really old and rusty. You could of course stop there, but to me it looks rather uniform in coloration, so I'm just taking the central tank section and I'm adding some paint onto that. For this I'm using a dark green, and again just mottling it on. A lot of sponging is involved when you're doing rust. Once you're happy with the coverage, obviously leaving a lot of the brown rust still showing through, I'm then going to use a lighter green colour and stipple that over the top of the dark green. It just breaks things up more and adds some more visual interest. Now I want to add some more detail to the side of my tank, so I'm going to be adding on some lettering. Now obviously the best way of doing this would be to use some kind of a machine like a Cricut to cut out some stencils. However, I don't have one of those, so I'm going for some old-fashioned masking tape with hand-drawn lettering on it and just using a hobby blade in order to cut those individual letters out. Now this is okay, but it's not the best. Ideally, if I had access to a printer at the moment, then I would type my text, print it onto some sticker paper, and then cut that out. And that would just give much nicer, more uniform lettering. Now this bit, taking the tape off, you really do have to be careful of, because those pieces of tape are very, very thin between the individual sections of each letter. If you go slowly and carefully though, you should be able to get your tape off without too much rippage. And then it's just a case of sticking it down where you want the lettering to go. With the stencil in place, I'm then going to dry brush in the letters using an ivory white, in this case Citadel Wraithbone. And in case anyone's not familiar with it, trioxin is a chemical which exists in the universe of the Return of the Living Dead movies, which is used for reanimating corpses. So I thought that would be a nice little touch for a piece of sci-fi terrain. Gently peel off the masking tape stencil and it can be used again on the other side of the tank. I want to add more dirt and grime and to weather down that text, so you can see here I've already painted on some Nuln Oil shade from Citadel in kind of streaks running down the barrel where dirty water and oil has dripped onto this barrel. Once that's dry, I'm then using Reichland Flesh shade, painting it on and then stippling that out all over the barrel with a sponge in order to add a lot more grime and kind of more rusty elements. I'm then pressing in some bullet holes where I want the chemical to be leaking out, although as you'll see later it's not actually necessary to do these holes because they're going to be completely covered over by that gunk. For my leaking chemical, I'm using a 2-part epoxy resin. This is really cheap stuff that I got for £1.25 from Poundland. And to that I'm adding some green and some yellow paint before mixing it all up together. We can then take that, scooping it up on the end of a cocktail stick and applying it to those bullet holes, making sure it runs down nicely, just painting with the end of the stick. And I also want to apply some of my leaking trioxin around the edge of this hatch so it helps delineate where the hatch actually is. And once that's done, I think that's me finished. And here you can see the final chemical tank in place on the wargame table, surrounded by zombies. Well, I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen here and that this inspires you to have a go yourself. If you have, please remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and we'll see you next time with more on Attic Raiders Retro Reviews.